What were some of the big pieces? Where do you want to start pulling this apart?
I'll make the same joke I made before the show. Michigan's defense, once again, getting empty calories against a Big Ten offense, just completely shutting them down. But no, it's that Michigan's defense won the football game. That's really what it comes down to. There was all the questions about Michigan hasn't seen an offense like this all year long. And as we talked about, they built this defense to stop Ohio State. It's not like they haven't seen it. It's not like they don't know how to deal with it. And as we also talked about, this isn't the first time Washington's offense had a bad game. They had bad games against Arizona State. They had a bad game against Oregon State. They had a bad game against Washington State. That was the Washington offense that showed up. Michael Penix was brilliant last week against Texas. Should he have won the Heisman? Should we wait until after the playoff to do the Heisman voting? He had a great game. But the thing with Michael Penix is, like all quarterbacks, if you pressure him and you speed him up, he is not going to look nearly as good. And today, Michigan sped him up. He had nowhere to step up in the pocket. And so instead, the one thing when it comes to evaluating him as a draft prospect, the one thing I've talked about is they talk about his quick release, but there's also the thing where he does the shoulder tilt to throw. He didn't have time to do his shoulder tilt. And when he doesn't do his shoulder tilt, what happens? He overthrows his target. Awful.
High. A lot of times he was missing his receivers high. 27 for 51 passing, 53% completion percentage, 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions. And yes, Tom, I agree with you. That seemed to be a frequent miss for him tonight.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, he missed Rome Odunze on a touchdown on the first drive. High. He missed Rome Odunze on that one. Was it a 3rd down or a 4th down where Odunze cooked Johnson with the double move, split the safety, and was wide open down the sideline? He overthrew him and missed him to the right. There was the other sideline play on the 4th down where he had him, but he just kind of threw it too far to the outside, and Odunze nearly caught it with one hand and pulled it in. They were just bad throws, and that's really what ended up costing Washington, because the fact of the matter is, Michigan should have won that, and they did end up winning the game by 21, but Michigan should have won that game by 40. The way this thing was going in the first quarter, it didn't seem like Washington had a shot in hell, but they were still in the game. Michigan just decided, why run the ball? Let's just see if we can throw for fun for 2.5 quarters, and they couldn't. And then they finally got it going again. But it's just, if Michael Penix played well, or at least average Michael Penix tonight, Washington's your national champion, but he didn't.
I think he didn't in part because Michigan saw what Penix did to Texas, and in some ways was like, hey, if you can make the really high difficulty throws again, if jump balls against our DBs, not Texas DBs, are truly 70-30 in your favor, then we'll tip our cap. But we are going to make you make the difficult throws. I thought Michigan did several things well tonight. First of all, they did get better edge pressure than Texas did, right? Penix did not step up in the pocket. He oftentimes did not have space, as Tom alluded to. He's also not a guy that likes to step up in the pocket real well. He's a guy who actually drifts and somehow completes balls while drifting. It's been sort of one of the criticisms of him by some of these NFL scouts. That's not going to work in the NFL. You can't just drift back. And to Tom's point with the shoulder tilt, I thought Michigan did a nice job. They did not play a lot of press, but they played a little bit kind of off catch coverage. And then they really aggressively tackled the Washington screens that Washington uses to get ahead of the chains. And so they kept Washington in longer down and distance quite often tonight. And Washington rarely got them out of their 2D look. Michigan was fairly confident that they were going to be able to stop the Washington run game with a lighter box. And they were correct in that guess. And that was kind of the key. Washington never really hit the explosive play. I think he had the 44-yarder to Odunze, but other than that, right, there wasn't much. And so I thought it was a nice plan of baiting Washington into throwing some of the screens, anticipating that the look you're giving Washington will, precipitate that pass being thrown, coming up and being physical and tackling them. I thought Michigan was a much better tackling football team tonight, and some of the explosive plays that Michigan hit were a direct result of Washington's continued poor tackling. They were one of the worst graded tackling teams in the country by PFF, not just in the playoff, but they were, I think, outside the top 100 in tackle grade. So Michigan did a great job of exposing the weaknesses of this Washington team and challenging Washington to continue to execute the really difficult stuff and are a little bit more pressure. And I thought tonight, as opposed to against Texas, Penix's eyes came down. Against Texas, he was just on like some absolute matrix stuff, but like still keeping the eyes up, dodging everybody in the pocket and throwing just absolute seeds. Tonight, the eyes came down some. And they also challenged him to throw the ball to the middle of the field where his numbers have really lagged, both in terms of rating when he does do it, but also his choices do not typically go to the middle of the field. He doesn't seem to have great comfort operating between the hashes. And Michigan sort of dared him to do so at times. They played a lot of split safety coverage, and he wasn't as great, as he was against Texas. And they needed him to be not only just good, I think they needed him to be great.
And to his credit, he again did it. He did the thing where, like last week in the Sugar Bowl, Texas got tons of pressures on him and he avoided sacks. He did that again tonight. Like, he avoided being sacked. It's just he was also making bad throws while he was doing it. Like, he wasn't just staying in the pocket and keeping aggressive and staying downfield. He was avoiding the sacks by just chunking the ball as a prayer. But like, that was the thing. I mentioned it last week when I was breaking down the Texas game against him. I said, this Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, they have great tackles, and I really like their center. Their guards are average. And that was again on display tonight. Their guards are average, and Mason Graham
physically. Yeah. Like, they communicate well, but they're not.
Yeah. They were just overpowered time and time again in this game. And that was very much evident from the start.
3.5 quarters of the national championship before Washington had its first and only play of more than 20 yards. To back up what you just said, Bud, Stat Broadcast logs every single play. So it's like the play count isn't going to line up your scrimmage plays, but that was play number 184 in this national championship game with a 44-yard completion to Rome Odunze. After that, you'd had 16 to Odunze. You'd had 15 to Jalen Polk. You had 15 to Dylan Johnson. That was a little bit of a catch and run, but nothing. I mean, just no explosive plays. And like, it was so interesting that we have this after this morning when I said, who are the rock star defensive coordinators right now? Because I do remember a time when, Clemson made Brent Venables one of the highest paid defensive coordinators. We're having this conversation in light of Baker getting hired at LSU. And, we said on the show, the Cover 3 tailgate also I saw later had filled in. They said, like, well, what about Jesse Minter? Like, that was a group that, to your point, they wrapped up. They kept everything in front of them, and they won the game. Michigan's defense, to me, I'm guessing Blake Corum because he finished with a whole bunch of yards. Let's see, what was the Corum total right now? Have we seen MVP get awarded?
2 touchdowns.
He had 134 and 2.
That'll get you the MVP.
21 attempts. So if you went under on attempts, you still won.
Yeah, under 21 and a half.
Freaking 59-yarder.
I think we had a good prop show. I don't know.
I can't remember I can't remember what I got the longest pegs completion under. Was it 43 and a half? Because I feel like it was 43 and a half. And of course it was 44.
So we cashed Donovan Edwards over. We cashed Westover over.
McCarthy rush yards over.
Rush yards over. I dropped Donovan Edwards first touchdown scorer plus 1,300 on CBS Sports HQ.
Yes, you did.
So, I saw this great comment earlier from the Cover 3 tailgate. Our guy, Mo Hill 93 says, had the Chip Patterson special, sprayed the board, didn't win much, but I had fun, tipped the dealer and got out of here. That's my guy right there. Or gal, not sure which one, can't tell by your avatar, but either way, that was a good way to go about it here on the final game of the 2023 college football season. What do we make of JJ McCarthy's performance in this game, Bud?
He's just kind of slow he's slow to read defenses. I feel like he's just not delivering the ball on time. There's a play in the third quarter where they're going, the camera angle is behind McCarthy and he's throwing the drag to, I think, Wilson. And I'm like, man, that's an on-target ball, and Wilson should catch that ball. But I think it's Wilson, right, is clearly hearing footsteps because he's been open for about 4 or 5 steps now. It's like, come on, man, get through your reads. Like, let's get the ball out. That thing has been open for a long time now. If you hit it on time, it's probably gonna, like, he has time to actually catch the ball and turn up field. Instead, he dropped it, which was it was a good throw. I just felt like Michigan would scheme stuff, and he just wouldn't hit it on time. And that has been kind of a different thing than what happened against Bama. Bama, I thought he saw it and just was erratic at times with some of the throw stuff. But he didn't commit the critical turnovers in the ballgame, which was helpful. I'm here at convention, and I was watching the game with some coaches, and their sentiment was like, Michigan should be blowing them out. Michigan's definitely moving them off the line of scrimmage. Washington's doing a great job in terms of like their run throughs and some of their run blitzes and their adjustments to after they had played it for about the first 10 minutes. Like, okay, we have to just send numbers because Michigan is moving our big people with their big people. And that Michigan had multiple chances to plunge the dagger or twist the knife, and they just didn't. And I was talking to coach, and he's like, you know what? If you got points for crossing the 30, this thing would already be over, but it's not. And there was that kind of that feeling like, okay, Michigan's a better team here. Michigan should be winning by more. Michigan feels like they're physically in control, but the scoreboard doesn't measure physical control. It measures actual points scored. And, Washington had that drive before the half. It's okay. Like, Michigan, you're going to screw it. And even kind of into the fourth for a minute, it was a little bit closer because Michigan, I don't know if they, I don't know if this is the best called game by Michigan either, but I thought McCarthy was, I just thought McCarthy was a little bit slow to hit stuff.
It was the same, like I said, it was the Rose Bowl all over again. They had stuff working. They completely got away from it for reasons unknown for 2.5 quarters. Like, I didn't know. I tweeted it, and I even mentioned it on HQ. It felt like they were trying to prove a point with JJ McCarthy. It felt like they were trying to get JJ McCarthy like a highlight moment type of game. And they got off of what they should have been doing the entire time instead of just running the ball. And again, then they finally do the drive in the fourth quarter where, oh my God, instead of handing off on first down, they did play action and they hit Loveland on the play that they probably ran 8 times in the last 2 games. And that was the first time they actually finally hit it. It was a really nice throw for a really nice pickup. Then they did the same play to Roman Wilson that they scored the touchdown on against Alabama last week. Another nice, he picked up another 15 yards. And why they just get away from that when it's working really well for them, I don't know. But we were asked on HQ at halftime. Joe Musso asked me,
need to go in a shout out show. Like, it was a good question to ask, 100%.
But he asked me, he's like, what defensive adjustments do Michigan need to make? And I said, none. They just need to start running the damn ball on offense. And that was basically all that. Yeah, I thought defensively they were brilliant. I think that you could shut that Washington offense down like that. You're doing a great job. And I felt like offensively they were their own worst enemy. I also think Washington did a very good job adjusting, especially with its run fits and getting into the lanes and closing that up. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it was like, I thought some of the passing for Michigan was because they were anticipating certain things from Washington as a response to the success that Michigan was having. And then Washington just kind of stayed defensively, sort of didn't do the things that Michigan anticipated on the next snap. And so it was like, that's actually a pretty good time to call a shot play. And like that screen, I definitely see what Michigan was doing. They just didn't get the look that they thought they were going to get from Washington. Like, Washington did a pretty good job of anticipating what Michigan thought that Washington was going to do to sort of like totally inception this thing.
I think that history will look back on this Michigan team and there will be a lot of stuff associated with it. But we look at the run and we're going to say, like, well, they got there. They got embarrassed by Georgia. They got back and they lost a game to TCU by 1 score where they threw 2 pick sixes. And it finally took this step and beating Alabama and getting there. I feel, Tom, I feel like we have a worthy champion for this season. I feel like this has been a team. They were one of the most dominant teams in terms of, like, forget this is a great example for forget strength of schedule. It's about like how you play against the teams you are scheduled to play. They beat the brakes off everybody, and they still showed that consistency all the way to the end with enough plays. Not a great national championship game performance, but enough plays to be able to get the job done. I feel like when the history books look back at this season, Michigan as this season's national champion, feels appropriate.
Yeah, they were the most dominant team of the regular season from start to finish. Like Georgia, I think at full strength, Georgia's better than Michigan. But I think that as far as performance this year, Georgia early in the season was messing around a lot. And I think that kind of caught up to him in the SEC championship game, honestly, whereas Michigan really just from the very first start in the very first game, they just mashed teams all season long. And then they get to the end of the year when the schedule actually got difficult. And the idea, the confidence that they built up and the fact that they knew what they could do to teams, I think helped get them through those games. And then it helped get them through the playoff because this is a team that, like you mentioned, the playoff failures of the last 2 years. This was the mission.
Yeah.
They didn't come back just to win the Big Ten and beat Ohio State again. They came back with the intent of winning a national title. So they had that mindset all year. They didn't take any games off. They came in, they played as hard as they could. They didn't play great all the time, but they always played hard. And in the end, they're national champions because of it, and they deserve it. And I mean, yeah, I don't know how much else there really is to say about it than that.
No, I think we may look back upon this and be like, this was not like one of the best teams of the playoff era, probably because of the lack of like the high-end passing game. But you know, one of the things I increasingly think about college football now is we may be we talk about a lack of parity in terms of maybe between team like 15 and 60, right? Like there may be like more teams pulling away from the pack. But I do think the very top may be coming down to like the rest of the real good teams ever so slightly, maybe more frequently. I don't know about every year. I will not rule out the idea that we'll have a super team again, maybe even as soon as next year. Who knows? But I think in this era, it is tougher to keep really good depth. And so I wonder if like, the teams of the next decade, maybe like the best teams we have aren't quite as good as when you could keep all that elite depth on your roster. It's just something I've been, not to blow show content, coming up, but just something I was kicking around today with a bunch of guys. Like, yeah, I don't think that like the best teams in college football are going to be quite as good as like the best teams from like a decade ago because of how like you just can't keep that many awesome players on your roster at one time.
Oh no, there's going to be another monster. We just never had a monster this season, and I think we knew that we didn't have a monster this season.
Yeah,
I think
like nobody was more than a 30.
We
power
knew,
rating type thing.
Yeah, we knew that among the top 6 teams, nobody was way ahead of everybody else. And the final margin on the scoreboard doesn't have me thinking differently about that. Michigan finishing on top of the heap, sure. Like, sounds right. Like I said, a fitting champion for this season based on the way they played and based on who else was there. There will be another monster. And like you said, it might be next year.
It'll be Illinois.
But we didn't identify that team at any point during the season. We talked about how many times number 1 was up for debate all throughout the year. So
yeah, exactly.
I definitely am with you that we might be seeing more teams up into that top tier, but there will be a season where you've got quarterback right. You've got enough guys that you've got enough you got enough trench players that are back. You've got 1 to 2 really special skill players. Even in the 12-team playoff era, I think that we're going to see a monster. Good on Michigan for getting the job done. Because you know what? There are a lot of seasons where college football programs look back and be like, man, we could have beaten them. Man, Georgia's saying that right now. Georgia watched this football game, and they were like, damn.
They don't post your final SP Plus rating on the banner they hang. Right, Ohio State still hangs the banner for the Craig Krenzel national title team. If you win every game by 1, you still win them. And like if you're Michigan, awesome for them, man. Like they created a lot of their own adversity, right? Like you don't get the credit for overcoming the adversity that you created, but to get your first outright.
All right, let's go into the fun stuff. Does Conor Stalions get a ring?
He better.
He better.
He will get a
freaking
ring,
better.
but not from the school, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Like Michigan's too administratively, I think, too buttoned up to give him a ring. But somebody will pony up the cash to get him.
Jim will buy him a ring.
No. Yeah. Forget somebody like buying it on eBay. Like there's going to be an extra ring put in for a towel boy, and that towel boy's ring is going to Conor Stalions.
Towel boy named Sonner Callions.
Sonner Callions.